Flyers Insider Kevin Durso is here as the Flyers win last night. They knock off the Penguins in just a wild game. I mean, I said, Kevin, if you turn that game on to someone who didn't watch hockey before and said, hey, you're going to root for the team in the orange and the black, and they watch 5 minutes, they'd say, get me out of this thing, and I don't ever want to go back. And then they called timeout and kind of settled in. They score that goal. And then kind of, that third period looked very impressive. Got a big game from the captain last night. But let's start with this. What happened early in that game that made them look horrendous?
That's just a team that wasn't ready to play. As simple as that. At least from the opening faceoff, they weren't ready to play. They were caught in a lot of bad situations, and mistakes, a lot of mistakes, honestly. I mean, Phil Myers makes a pinch along the wall. There's not the support at the back end to allow for everybody to come back. He was late on the back check, so that allows Mark Friedman to get behind everybody, so he's there for the rebound on the one goal. Sean Couturier had a turnover in the offensive zone, basically just made a pass directly to Evgeny Malkin. That started a 3-on-2. They scored off of that as well. Even the first goal, which is kind of a fluky play, but it still qualifies as a bit of a mistake because Travis Sanheim tries to glove down the puck instead of maybe putting his body in front of it or trying to knock it down in a different way. It's more of a low percentage play when you try to play it with your hand, and he gets a piece of it but not all of it, and that's how it deflects by Brian Elliott. So kind of a series of unfortunate events, but also just lack of execution, and that's why the timeout came when it did, and it happened so quickly. This was 3:57 into the game, and what was it? I think a minute and 11 seconds was the 3 goals separated. And that's just, it's unheard of and it's not acceptable at all. And that's why you saw the timeout. I give Alain Vigneault a lot of credit, not just for calling the timeout there. I kind of thought he was going to do it after the second one, to be honest. And instead it took the third one. But I give him credit for sticking with Brian Elliott because none of those goals were Brian Elliott's fault and letting this situation play out. You said it earlier in the show, and I think you're dead on with it. He had a bit of a Peter Laviolette moment there where you look up at the clock, you look up at the score, and you say, there's enough time left in this game that it's not over. Just get one first and start to build back towards it, and that's exactly what they did.
You mentioned that none of them were Elliott's fault. They're going to go with Elliott again. Kind of give us some reasoning why, and not that this is a bad thing, just kind of, give us what Vigneault's explanation was on why he's going to go right back to Elliott. So back-to-back Elliott's against Pittsburgh. He'll go tomorrow.
Yeah, and I don't think that there was any overly particular reasoning to it. They have a back-to-back, and Alain Vigneault's kind of stressed multiple times throughout the last week the 6-9 situation that they have. They have 6 games over the course of 9 days, and he's never seen anything like that in his coaching career. So he's really trying to juggle the workload for both guys. This particular situation, it's a back-to-back on a weekend. So you're going to go with one and then the other. So it was just a matter of who got the start first. This is probably, honestly, exactly the way I would have drawn it up myself, honestly. I think that Elliott was, depending on if he could have won you that game, which he did last night, then I'd set it up for him to play on Saturday, and then you not only get Carter Hart against the team that he's had success against in his career in Washington, but you put him on home ice where he's been playing well, obviously, and you put him on home ice for the first game with fans back in the building, which I think is a boost for the team in general, but definitely for him. And I think it sets up nicely that that's the way it's going to work. So that's part of the reasoning, in my opinion, that Brian Elliott's going again against Pittsburgh on the road, and then Carter Hart's coming back for the first home game with fans back in the building.
Kevin Durso covers the Flyers at Kevin_Durso. And, to get back in that game, the special teams, kind of talk about how they came through last night and helped this team out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I go back to the Tuesday game because they had a chance to bury the Penguins right at the beginning of the game. 2 power plays. They didn't score on them. It was still scoreless through the first period. And once the score was 3-1 in favor of Pittsburgh, as the Penguins were starting to dominate that second period, you got another power play where you could have trimmed the lead then and found your way back into the game, and they didn't score on that. And then again, same thing. They had 2, one towards the very final seconds of the second period that carried into the third, and another one right after that, and they didn't score on those either. And to go 0 for 5 on the power play against a team whose penalty kill was 29th ranked in the league at that time, it just doesn't, it's not acceptable, but it's also a huge missed opportunity to put your stamp on the game one way or another, whether it's early in the game when you can carve out a lead and give yourself the advantage right away, or when you can work on trimming the lead that Pittsburgh had established. Either way, it was an opportunity, and they didn't take advantage of it. In this game, that was their first power play, and they got right on the board with it, and that at least started things off. And then I give special teams credit both ways, too, obviously. They had a chance to lose the special teams battle with just, one penalty kill going the wrong way. They were on the penalty kill right after that third goal against too. So it was like the carryover from the first 4 minutes of 3 goals being scored
Right.
also included a penalty. So now, honestly, if you were watching that game like you talked about and we're kind of ready to tune out after 3-0, you probably, if you were hanging in there at that point, we're thinking 4-0 was coming. And they killed off that penalty. And I really give them credit in the third period because that situation when Kevin Hayes takes a penalty, it's kind of a ticky-tack call there, and they find a way to kill that one off too. So the margin stays at 1. The game is within their reach, and they find a way later in the period to make it happen.
I want you, Kevin, this is what, your third, fourth year on this beat here. So you've been around the captain a lot. He's 33 years old, which, I don't know, in hockey terms, he's on the older side. You don't see, a lot of older guys out there, but you would look at in 3 goals, 14 assists. Last night, it was like one of those moments where you're like, see, he's still got it. Kind of describe to people who maybe question Giroux or aren't sure where he is in his career. What do you like? Where is Claude Giroux at in terms of impact player at this stage of his career?
Well, I think he's still an impact player on any team at this point, but the way that I like to classify it, and I wrote it in the takeaways, is there's people who look at a guy and see the captaincy and see the C on the chest and go, that's got to be the best player on the team. And that's not always the case. Typically, it's a guy who people try to follow that player's lead in terms of preparation, in terms of what they do on and off the ice and how they carry themselves. And that's the guy who represents the team for the room. That's a player decision. It has so much less to do with everything outside of the locker room than it does in the room. So that's why he's the captain and continues to be the captain, is because the players in that room trust him and they believe in him, and he believes in the rest of the team as well to be successful and do their job. But what you are seeing is that, I even sat there and I wrote it in the takeaways. He's not the best player on this team anymore, but there are nights where he showed up and has been in a particular game. And I think you saw that last Wednesday when they played the Rangers and he went out with no ice time after being off the COVID list and had it one of his best games of the year. And then last night as well, you see him still take over a game. You see him still get into those positions.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's really telling about him is his dedication to this franchise. He's got that fire in his eyes in games like that, and you could see it when they were scoring those goals, even the second goal in the second period, where they're just still working their way towards coming back in the game. But he's fired up about that situation, and the game's about half over, and there's still a lot left to be played. It doesn't necessarily indicate that the swing is going to continue in their favor. You still have to work at it for the last half of the game, but it does continue. And then when he's on the ice for the tying goal and scores the winning goal, you see the emotion from him in those spots. And there's a lot of times in the past where we haven't seen that emotion sometimes, but I think the older he gets, the more we're seeing it, because he knows how much time is running out on his career and how important it is to try to make this happen as soon as possible. So when they can win a big game, when they can still keep up in the playoff race, announce their presence as a contender in the division, he's going to get fired up about it, and he's going to try to get everybody else on that team to follow his lead.
Yeah, and last night they kind of highlighted it on the broadcast. You don't realize you're 20 games in. You only got 36 games left. Like, if you had 36 games left in a normal season, every game is highlighted. And I felt like they knew how important that game was last night, especially in the third period late. And I thought that Aubé-Kubel pass, and Giroux, I don't think got enough credit for keeping himself out of the goal crease and somehow just, boom, getting that in. I mean, somehow they slipped that through about 4 skates, a goalie's stick. It was a pretty important win for them last night because a loss, you drop down, then you're playing Pittsburgh after getting beat twice. I thought that was a monumental spot for Giroux to get that game winner.
Yeah, it was, and I'm glad you pointed out the play by Aubé-Kubel as well, because that's just an outstanding pass.
Which, by the way, give JVR credit for keeping that puck into that zone and getting the face-off there.
Yeah, so many little things came out in this. The JVR play before that keeps the face-off in the offensive zone. On Giroux's first goal, there's a subtle little pinch by Justin Braun that keeps the play alive. Braun doesn't even get an assist on the play, but he keeps the play alive, and it extends the shift. I love that goal by Giroux at the end, too, because that was one of the types of goals that burned the Flyers in previous games. We saw at least 2 goals in the first game on Tuesday against Pittsburgh where guys got inside positioning on the goalie, and they're in the crease, and they're around the crease, and they're in that area where they can score. And Claude Giroux gets himself into position, gets that inside positioning, and is there with his stick on the ice waiting for the pass should it come his way, and he just puts it home. I just think that was just such a fitting play for that style of game, the way that they held themselves in that third period. And you're right, the importance of the game in general, because as I wrote in the takeaways, it's not just about winning the game and saying, okay, if you win the game or whether you win or lose, losing the game drops you below the playoff line in the standings, winning keeps you above it. It's the regulation wins. They got the game tied, and I think that they would have been satisfied with getting the game to overtime if you can, because you were down 3-0. You can accept that 1 point. But when you can go out and actually find a way in the last 6.5 minutes to score before that and claim it in regulation, now Pittsburgh gets nothing out of that, no matter how great they played in the first 5 minutes of the game. That's the most important thing.
Well stated by Kevin Durso. Read his 5 takeaways from the game last night at 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter for tomorrow's Flyers Penguins round 3. And then on Sunday, they'll have a Capitals beginning. It'll be Carter Hart on Sunday, Brian Elliott tomorrow. Both games on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget, you can listen to the game on your phone through the free mobile app. All right, Durso, have a great weekend. A lot of pucks for you. I'm sure you're excited.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, man. And don't forget, check him and Broads out on the Open Ice Hits podcast with their guests, of course, Johnny Gaudreau. He appears once a week on that podcast with Kevin Durso and Hunter Brody.